She's the chief co-editor of Social Impact of Tourism, Frontiers in Sustainable Tourism, where she is currently co-editing a research topic on children in tourism, which proposes a child-inclusive, childist approach to tourism. This is part of a broader social justice agenda, which is critical in tourism research to privilege children's rights, their participation, and well-being. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to hand over the floor to my former supervisor, colleague, and friend, Associate Professor Heike Schänzel.
Oh, thank you so much, Richard, for the very welcoming words, and thank you really for inviting me here. So I've only recently come back from Europe, as Sophie already mentioned, so I'm still a bit jet-lagged. I've been up since 4 o'clock, but anyway, I'll see how I go. Yeah, so where to begin? Thank you, Oscar, as well. So thank you for that little pitch. I'm also the co-chair of the next ANZALS conference. So please consider attending the ANZALS conference at AET in Auckland, which is from the 4th to the 7th of December. And yes, anyone who doesn't know me yet, I can always leave my email address in the chat. You know a person now, so if you've got any questions, please let me know. Hopefully it will be a great event. We're still working towards it, and it's still open for abstract submission as well. I've prepared some slides, but I think we really should just make this interactive, and I try and do my best to tell. In many ways, it's about a storyline, isn't it? Everything we do in life, can you see it? Is about a storyline, correct? Who are we? And that's, I can tell you from when I started my PhD. So I did my PhD at Victoria University in Wellington. And as a mature student with 3 children, I started in my 40s. I really discovered in many ways, probably because I had 3 children and I traveled a lot, that there was very little published on families and children. And so I embarked on that. But I can also tell you, when I started out, none of this was apparent. I actually really struggled to find any identity or any niche as such. When I finished my PhD, I desperately had to find a job, like all of us, isn't it? But at the time, so this was now 13 years ago, all the focus was on sustainability. And I guess to a certain extent, it still is about sustainability. And my research wasn't necessarily on sustainability. Yes, it's about social sustainability, and it's probably actually emerged that way, but at the time it wasn't. And I really struggled together with Professor Karen Smith. We actually had to brainstorm, and I almost actually had to consider whether I actually need to change tack or, do things. So in the end, I actually did find a job at AET, and it's actually served me really well. And yes, then I had wonderful students like Richard, and of course now Sophie and others. And I see Victor's actually attending as well, who's currently my PhD students. So what I'm actually trying to say, a lot of these things are not apparent. And that's the thing. And that's part of it's evolving in many ways. Finding your niche can actually really take time, and actually attending conferences and having networks are actually really important as part of this process as well. I believe my first conference was an ANZALS conference in Tauranga. I can't even remember how long ago that was. And I've attended several ANZALS conferences as well as CAUTHE conferences. And I really feel like I've found my home. It's really important, as Sophie mentioned as well, because some of these journeys can be quite lonely, and I think it doesn't actually have to be lonely. So that's all part of that as well. So finding your niche, you actually need other people for that as well. So what I'm actually trying to say today, I'm now in my 50s. Yes, I'm free to probably say that. So I think what I'm saying today as well comes with a little bit of life experience as well. And you will find a lot of advice over the years, and some of it might apply, and others might actually not necessarily apply, because I would actually argue and say there isn't one way. There never is one way. You have to find your own path, and it really, really, really starts with who you are, and think about who you actually want to be as well, and what kind of researcher or what kind of academic, or actually also what kind of person you want to be. What is important to you? Because over the years, I've received a lot of well-meaning advice. Yes, most of it was really valuable, but I also would argue some of it probably wasn't actually for me. And so it's really important to remember there isn't one way. There never is. It's your life, it's your path. And in the end, how you determine what's important to you is much more important than maybe trying to form into ideas of what an academic career or research career is going to look like. And so later on, we've actually got to exercise about that. What is your narrative? Who do you want to be? What's important to you as well? So who you are and your values very much determine what kind of academic you would want to become. So going back to when I finished my PhD, I've since published a lot, and admittedly I've published maybe too much out of a PhD, and maybe, I don't know, whether that was a good idea or not, but anyway, it happened that way. And you might actually say, can you actually publish too much? Yes, probably. I could have been maybe to be more strategic, but that's all part of that as well. There are different ways of how you go about it. And I give you sort of example to that as well. So for me, yes, I published a lot. I've also approached, and I think that's actually a really, really important life lesson as well. Do not shy away from approaching others. I found in my career that actually no one really said no to me. But you do have to be proactive about this. And yes, sometimes these things didn't eventuate, but no one actually said no straight up. So it's really, really important to actually be proactive, and make that a collaborative process as well. It doesn't have to be a lonely journey. So for me, it was really important um, to have these collaborations, to work with others, because that's something I really enjoy. And for me, it was also important because, as I mentioned at the time, I published when I embarked on my PhD on family tourism and including children. It was really important to me to encourage others to work in this field as well, so have some impact in that field. So I guess I wasn't always as strategic. I probably could have been more strategic and really go for high-ranked journals. But for me, it probably was more important to actually really make a difference in a field as well. Um, and that actually led to, for example, edited books. So, for example, what happened when I was at Victoria University, you might know Ian Yeomans. He's published a lot. I don't even know. I think he might have published 16 books or something like that by now. And I got actually talking to Ian, and yes, he had no interest in, family tourism was definitely not on his agenda. But for me, when I was sort of looking at that, this was 14 years ago now, there was only one other book published on family holidays. And I felt like there was a real gap. And it was important to actually really get more voices out and really encourage more research and promote family tourism and children in tourism. And so I collaborated with Ian Yeomans because he knew how to get a proposal across the line. He knew how to deal with publishers. And so we actually co-edited a book on family tourism. It has served me really well, I would argue, and some would actually say co-editing books might not be a good career move. I even actually had, so that just to give you an example, a professor from the UK, because I since have published or co-edited other books. I think I've actually co-edited 5 books by now. And I'm currently actually just put my hand up to do a handbook on children and families in tourism, who actually that professor in the UK said to me, no more edited books. Because in many ways, if it actually comes to promotion applications, quite often edited books don't necessarily count as much as journal publications. But, and that's the really, really important but, and that's something for you to maybe think about as well. What is important to you? And for me, it was always important to actually have some impact and maybe make a difference in a field as well. And I feel like actually, like I said, 12 or 13 years later, there have been a lot more publications in research on families in children and tourism. And that was always really, really important for me. I would also argue actually being able to edit a book or publish a book is probably part and parcel of being a more rounded academic as well. And so I will continue doing it. And I've just signed another contract, and it will take quite a bit of my time. On the other hand, I'm loving it actually sending out those emails and seeing the field grow and seeing actually some of the research that's been actually done now and how it's changed over the years. It's just a wonderful feeling as well. So yeah, so that's really important. And just as a side note, the professor who actually told me to no more edited books has actually since left academia. He has retired probably early, and a part of it is, yes, burnout. But I would also argue there's sort of different ways of burnout. Burnout can be because, yes, overwork, but it can also be because your values no longer align with the demands of what academia is actually asking of you as well. So I would also actually caution anyone to move away from what's important to you, but actually really think about what is important, and if something you really want to do it, because this might actually save you in the long run from actually some of these burnouts as well. Another actually point, and that's sort of going back what I was facing when I actually finished my PhD and everyone talked about sustainability, is, like I said, there are different ways of actually advancing as a researcher or in academia. There isn't a one way, and that's where, like I said, a lot of advice is well-meaning, but does not always apply. Because, for example, if you work in sustainability, you probably become a very small fish in a very big pond. And someone recently who actually who publishes and does research in sustainability actually said to me, it's much harder to publish things on sustainability because there's so many people publishing there. And I thought that's an interesting perspective, isn't it? I've never thought about that. And so it's a matter of relevance as well. Whereas in my field, I'm probably a bigger fish in a smaller pond. And I would argue there's still a lot of gaps. But on the other hand, it can sometimes be hard to actually find that relevance, like I actually had, because, so much is on sustainability. But in the end, again, what's important to you comes foremost. And I also would argue, as researchers, we need diversity. We don't necessarily need everyone researching in sustainability because there's so many other fields as well. So it's sort of something for you to consider as well. So on the one hand, my approach was being much more collaborative research, including edited books. I'm now working on a special issue. I think I've done 5 or 6 special issues, and I've actually done one for Annals of Leisure Research as well. Again, it was on families in leisure, so family leisure, which actually was Nia Carr. And just as an example, Nia Carr was the editor of Annals of Leisure Research at the time. And I approached him and I just sent an email to him. He did know me. We didn't know each other well, but we did know of each other because we met each other at an ANZALS conference. And that's where these conferences are really, really important, because we actually sat together at that first conference in Tauranga next to each other at the dinner. So I remember that. So I sent him an email and I said, what do you like of that idea of doing a special edition on family leisure? And he got back to me, oh, that's not a bad idea. And so we worked together, and that actually led to 3 special editions. So it's actually become quite successful, and that actually even became an edited book as well. So you never really know where these things lead. And I've since worked with Nia Carr on several book chapter publications. So you never really know where it leads. So that's just an example of actually, first of all, taking some initiative. So be proactive. Yes, conferences, you never know where it can lead. And also, being probably a bit broader in your approach as well. So that's always been my approach. But I also know of others who are much more strategic. So, for example, who've only published in very high ranked journals, published actually a lot less probably than what I have done, but much more strategic, and also probably and also have done much more single authored, which I haven't actually done. On the other hand, when it actually came to the promotion application, and that's something for you to consider as well, because leadership is actually really important. And if you have that very single-minded approach, and publish mainly by yourself, leadership becomes a lot harder to prove. And of course, we all work in a team as well, so it's something to consider as well. So there's different ways of actually approaching this as well. Another thing, and again, you will have to face that, and that was quite a turning curve for me as well. That sort of on my slide, the big step from being a humble student to having to market yourself at interviews and promotion applications. Oh my gosh, that's really tricky. And maybe some of you had already had to face that, because we're all being told, isn't it, to be humble, but when you actually have to go to an interview or write a job application, or I'm going for promotion again, suddenly you actually really have to write about the things you have achieved without bragging in many ways. And like I said, we've got to exercise later on as well. So that's where it becomes really important to understand the narrative of who we are and really working on that narrative as well. And really selling yourself. So that's a really, really big step. And I would very, very much argue you do need others to help you on that, because it takes several rounds, because we always think, oh, I haven't actually done much. And I was no different to that as well. It's only when I actually bounced it back with someone else, they said, oh, you've actually done all of these things. And I had to reflect on it and said, oh, you're right, I might have actually done. But because we become so used of the things we do, we actually don't realize how we've actually progressed in the things we've actually achieved. So it's also really, really important to whatever you do. So like, for example, attending or maybe even speaking here today, to really put these things on your CV, update your CV, and really have a running document, and really include all these things, because it's all part of research training and all these things as well. So yes, we all need mentors to flourish and help us see our own achievements. And again, from a bit of a life perspective. And I remember there was actually Mark Orams um, who was our department head for a while, and he was very surprised when quite a few staff members said, "We want mentoring. Why don't we get mentoring?" And Mark Orams at the time said, "But my door was open. Why did you not come in?" So yes, don't necessarily expect that any senior academics come to you. But most, and that's my experience as well, you have to be proactive. You have to sometimes ask for help. Most people are happy to help you, and you do actually need a helping hand. Hopefully, their first port of call should be your supervisors, but that doesn't always work. But yeah, be proactive in these things. And also approach other researchers for help, collaborations. My example was near CARB. Like I said, there was an email, there was a stab in the dark in many ways, but it actually was, yeah, in my opinion, very successful. Like I said, we actually, it ended up being 3 special issues for Annals of Leisure Research. And for me, there was actually, and it also included, of course, 3 editorials like I said, it actually ended up being published as an edited book as well. And for me, it was really nice to see to make an impact in the field, like on family leisure and children in leisure. And I can still see how it's actually developing as well. So yes, what works for some might not work for you. So it's just something to remember. So now we actually have a little exercise for you as well. Reflect on who you are and what kind of academic you would like to become. So think about what is important to you and what aligns with your values. Because in the end, I would always argue, and that's in life, we have to be who we are and we have to live with that. So, how do you derive meaning in your life? How important is your career to you? I would also argue um, careers are important, but they're not the be end and be all. It's really, really important to have other interests in life as well. Um, I've had children, but I also like to do a lot of things. Those who know me, they know that I like to be outside a lot. In summer, I do a lot of sailing. And now, I'm back in winter. I'm actually checking the snow every day. Grew up here. I bought a season pass as soon as I arrived on Monday. So I love skiing. I love hiking. I love to be outside. I derive a lot of pleasure from that. And it's really, really important to me as well. And I always tell my students as well, um, so those, like I said, I'm supervising. I want to say, yep, it's really important to study, but what do you do in your weekend? Go outside, do things. We need a balance because I've seen a lot of my students really burn out as well. Um, and so that's something, it's about pacing ourselves as well. And so that's sort of my next question as well. Do you see yourself as advancing to professor level as quickly as possible? And then my question, and again, people have approached me about that, and there was someone, she sort of asked me, and there was a researcher in Australia, and said, I'm not sure, I really want to be a professor in my early 40s. And I sort of looked at her, look, what do you do then if you become a professor in your early 40s? You've still probably got another 20 or 30 years of working. So, what's the rush? We have to sort of pace ourselves in life as well. And her question was, should I actually have children or not? And I said, gosh, that's a hard one, isn't it? I would never want to be without children, but of course, that's not for everyone. Um, she now actually has a child, and it's really nice to see. So I think, life is about pacing yourself. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I give you the example of someone, and I think that's the thing, if we try to rush too hard, it's, it might actually end up into a shorter life as well. So pace yourself. Do other things. Find meaning outside of career as well, and outside of academia or research, or even as a PhD student. Go outside and do things, whatever it is. It might be singing, it might be music, it might be sports, it might be arts. It is important to have another life, whatever it is. It should not be a sprint. It's really about pacing and thinking of it of a long term as well. Because in many ways, it doesn't actually matter. I actually still think, does it actually matter if I become a professor or not? Yeah, I will apply for professor, hopefully this year. I'm not sure whether I get it or not, but it's not the most important thing in my life. I can tell you that. So that's sort of something to consider as well. So what kind of researcher are you? Are you quite happy to work by yourself? So think about that. Or are you someone who relishes collaborative research opportunities, which is me? I love to work with others. I just get a lot more meaning out of it. When I work on something, I get a first stab at something, then I send it to my collaborator, and they've got their great ideas, then it comes back to me. I just find this kind of working brings out the best in me, and I also think brings out the best collaborative. It's different brains coming together, different perspectives. So it's thinking about what's important to you and how you actually work as well. Are you driven by making a difference in a particular field? What is important to you? Yeah, so really think about that as well. The other one is, are you more of a teacher or do you prefer research? If you want to go into academia, that's always a hard bit to balance. Most people say, sort of, as an academic, it's about 40% teacher or, lecturer, 40% research, and 20% is service. So that's where, for example, reviewing or being an editor or working on, committees and things like this as well. Most of us are not necessarily good at everything, so we need to balance that as well. So that's something to consider as well, how to marry that and what's important to us. Yes. So do you want to be really, really driven and very strategic, or are you someone who enjoys going with the flow and by embracing different opportunities? That's probably me. Like I said, I've sort of embraced things, and then one thing led to another thing. And I've always actually really enjoyed that because you never really quite know where it takes you. So I like that little bit of mystery. And I also like sometimes things just coming back to me after a few years. I said, oh, yes, I've done this then in something. So, yes, so never really know. Like I said, my approach wasn't necessarily the most strategic, even so it had some strategy as well. Um, but I also feel now that it gave me a richness that maybe another approach didn't really or wouldn't have given me. But again, there isn't a right or wrong on how to approach this. It's something you have to figure out for yourself as well. It's also, of course, the demands of academia, and that can be really, really hard on you. And yes, the demands today all say hiring journal publications, and we all have to probably get some. But I also would actually really, really caution and say, don't sell your soul for academia. In the end, we have to live with ourselves. So, yeah, try and find your spaces and the things that actually bring you joy and go for them. So that's, important to remember. So here is my academic narrative. And like I said, over the years, um, I even got feedback. We had that was a PhD workshop at CAUTHE actually, and they are brilliant. So I very much encourage you to attend any of them. And some of it might be actually feel repetitive, but I think you always actually learn more. And yes, there was a senior professor who actually said, "I'm not sure you could ever actually really." Um, become a professor, in my field on family, tourists, and children. But I think it's all part of that narrative. And I had to learn that as well, because now I'm actually, as you will, and I will read it out shortly, it becomes a lot more about social sustainability and social justice issues. So you have to find a broader narrative on where you can actually hang on. And yes, I've been practicing my narrative and I've been shaping it. And probably after today, I will actually change it. It is ongoing, it is evolving, but it's something to think about. So this is currently my narrative. So my research agenda is driven by a commitment to bring about change to social justice issues relating to children, families, and gender equality, working towards attaining social sustainability in tourism, leisure, and hospitality. This drive informs my publication, teaching, supervision, and mentorship commitments, along with my position as co-chief editor of Social Impact in Tourism, Frontiers and Sustainable Tourism, and co-chair of ANZALS 2023. I'm also currently a co-editor of as I think Richard mentioned that, that's for social impact in tourism, a research topic on children in tourism. And I've also put my name forward for the big World Leisure Summit in Dunedin, happening on a special session on children and families in leisure. So I've been putting my name forward, and I feel like, it's important to me, as I mentioned, to make that difference in really encouraging more research and more drive. And that's where I sort of put that mentorship and that leadership. And I really feel like it's actually come a long way in that sense. And like I said, I've also recently signed another contract with Edward Elgar on a handbook on children and families and tourism as well. So yeah, to make a difference as part of that, and really, and I've done webinars on childism, so it's that whole narrative, and that's part of that narrative of bringing about some change and bringing about attention to that social dimension in tourism, the social sustainability aspect. That's really important to me. But now I've got an exercise for you, and we've given about 20 minutes, so I believe Sophie will shortly put you into breakout rooms. So the exercise is the narrative exercise. So what's your storyline or elevator pitch? If someone introduces you at a webinar or keynote, how would you want to be introduced? So can you summarize your professional narrative or your research narrative in a few sentences? So that's really just a few sentences. And yes, can you practice your narrative? Talk to the others. Can you actually summarize who you are, your storyline or narrative as a researcher in about 2 or 3 sentences? So we've given this about 20 minutes as an exercise. And yes, over to you and over to Sophie, I believe. And I think I will come in and out of the breakout rooms, and I believe Richard as well. So yes, any questions so far? Hello?
Hi, I think Michelle has a question. Michelle, yes, please go ahead with your question.
I thought I'd pop my hand up just.
Yep.
Thank you, Heike. That was really useful. What I was thinking about was just, I guess, the confidence to actually approach people in those situations at conferences and different journal papers and that sort of thing. I guess that's where I struggle, is having that sort of approaching someone and thinking that they're actually going to have some interest. And I just appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I guess I was slightly older, so maybe that actually helped a bit. But my experience is all academics love to hear that you've read their work, and, it's one of the most rewarding emails I actually get if someone approaches me and says, you read your work, can you help me? Are you interested? So, yes, I guess you just have to move forward. And like I said, I was sitting next to Neil Carr at that ANZALS conference. So that always helps. And I always actually say, if you go to conferences, always go to the dinners and go to the field trips. Because yes, in that more official environment, when we do presentations and afterwards, correct, it's really daunting. But this is where the field trips come in, or the evenings where we're all a little bit more relaxed. And that's hopefully that allows for that little bit of chatting. So really, really important. Just overcome it. Maybe don't just go straight, do you want to work with me? But, maybe just chat a little bit. But yes, some of these. And I'll give you another example as well. I met John Jenkins, and that was another, not even sure if that was, I think that was a CAUTHE conference years ago. And I was working on a research project on single fathers in leisure. And I thought, there's no way I want to write this up by myself. Working with fathers. And I know John Jenkins actually did. He was sort of the only one who actually worked on fatherhood and leisure. And we met at that conference, and we probably had about a 10-minute chat. And I approached him and said, do you actually want to, write this up with me? And yes, it did actually lead to a collaboration. So yeah, it's a bit daunting, but I think you just have to overcome it a bit. Sophie had some advice. Oh yes, ask someone else to introduce you. That's always a good idea, actually. If you have your supervisors or someone else there. Thank you, Sophie. That's a very good advice. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Heike. And I think Anita also has a comment there. She mentioned, I often find trying to connect human to human and not academic to academic helps a lot in breaking the barriers and the power imbalance, if that makes sense. Yeah, thanks for that, Anita. And I think, Heike, when you mentioned attending these informal activities during conferences, just break these barriers. So it alludes to that. So thank you for raising this up. Katie has a question. So, yep, I think we'll address one question from Katie, and then we move on to the exercise.
Okay, I've got more of a comment, sort of rather than a question, but similar to what Sophie had said. It's one of the reasons, the driving forces for us having these mid-year conferences and the workshops before conferences is so that students can meet other students. And as I was saying to Sophie, like you might want to go meet your hero, but you've got another friend to go and help you go over and introduce yourself and have a chat with them. And that's one of our main objectives with our workshops before conferences, is to get the students to know other people so that when they go into this conference environment, they've got their battles with them, or their allies with them, I should say, to help sort of overcome a lot of those scary moments.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, like I said, I worked in a smaller field. So probably if you go to the really highest rank professors, so I haven't had that experience because, like I said, I already started out probably in a more niche field. But on the other hand, you'd be surprised. And, in the end, what's the worst? What's the worst outcome? Like I said, from my experience, no one's actually really said no. It might have not always happened that way. Yeah, so and exactly, you know me now as well. And that's where the workshops, yes, the PhD workshops as well, because you actually meet some of those seniors colleagues as well. So yeah, like I said, good ideas. You could always say, could we actually meet up over a coffee or something, or yeah, get introduced, or over dinner, have a little chat. I always find once you've danced with an academic on the dance floor, you know, that's the breaking ice. You wouldn't believe. It makes a big difference. Yes. And yes, it's a bit intimidating, but hey, we've all started somewhere. And yeah. So let's keep at it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Heike. And thank you so much for everyone for those wonderful comments and questions. So yeah, I think we can go to the breakout rooms now and reflect on our narrative exercise.
It's actually, yeah, I should do it with all my PhD students. Yeah. So, right.
Welcome back, everyone.
Yep. Well, thank you. So what did you think of it? Because I know Richard had his, because we've already practiced this. We had in Wellington, we had a PhD workshop. So, but I think most of you haven't really thought about it. And like I said, I haven't really either. It's also a result. I had to attend a workshop as well because we need a PBRF narrative. So like I said, it's something you just, whatever you do, you need it. Like I said, job applications or introduction. And of course, if you introduce yourself, you probably don't want to have it quite as highbrow, you know, probably a more personal level. But yeah, it's good to be able to, you know, summarize. And I think Richard, was it Richard? Did you get the elevator pitch at the PhD examination? Were you asked to give an elevator pitch?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's something to bear in mind as well when you come actually to PhD examination. What's your elevator pitch? You've got 1 minute. You know, what's your research about? So it's a good idea to be able to clearly voice it and summarize it. And, you know, who are you? What drives you? Where's your passion? And what do you do? So, I realize we're sort of coming to the end. So I think I've got one more slide. Can you actually still see my slides, or I have to share again, isn't it? Yeah. Any questions? Can you hang on? No.
Can see your slides now.
Can you see it?
It's just on the narrative exercise.
Oh,
And now your desktop.
can you see this? I mean, to be honest, it doesn't actually matter. I can just talk to it as well. So this is just a little bit of life advice, really, more than anything else. As I sort of mentioned earlier, you will get a lot of well-meaning advice, but not necessarily everything applies to you. So like I said, this is your life and you're allowed to follow your own path. Like I said, I got that advice, no more edited books.
Heike, sorry, I think you might need to move forward one slide. I don't know about everyone else. I'm seeing the narrative exercise slide, not the next.
Hang on. Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
I've got a different thing to click. I've got two monitors anyway. So yes, do what's important to you. This is, you know, we've got one life and you've got your own path. And as I sort of mentioned earlier, it's important that you align with what's important to you, with how you approach academia or research or anything, because otherwise you just burn out. Burnout is not always just because of overwork, because I think most of the burnout happens because our values don't coincide with the values of wherever you work. So it's important. We also actually need to push back a little bit to academia as well. Academia should not just be about publishing and hiring journals. There's more to it as well. So what's important to you? And some of you already mentioned that actually working with industry is really important. So yeah, don't lose sight of it. And if it doesn't work out with academia, maybe that's just the way it is, but don't sell your soul. So that's just really, really important. What we mentioned earlier, don't be shy to approach people for advice and collaboration. And we've talked about that and some really good advice. Maybe get someone else to introduce you. Sophie, we got chatting as well. Maybe prepare yourself as well. So at a conference, maybe don't necessarily approach all high-ranked professors, but, you know, the ones or others that are in your field. Like I said, we all like to be flattered, don't go overboard, but saying I've actually read your work and it's really important to me is already a very, very good introduction. And yes, we all struggle, I think, with that first introduction. But maybe say, look, do you have 5 minutes? Could we actually share a coffee? I love your work. It's really important to me. And see where that actually leads as well. And yes, for any of these narratives or story lives or spiel, it's a good idea to talk to others. We all need mentors. We can't do it because we usually don't see the things we've done. We need some outside perspectives. Another thing, and that's just really life advice, we live in communities. Most of the people actually like to be helpful. I've traveled a lot and I find approaching people, I've just come back from Europe. Actually, most people are very helpful. It's the same in academia. We are an academic community. If you find the occasional person, don't take it personal. Most people are actually really, really helpful and like to be helpful. Update your CV as you go. I can't emphasize that enough, because when it actually comes down to a job interview or job application, we forget. It's the same for a promotion application and so on. Oh, I haven't done much. Actually, yeah, we have. So yeah, like I said, what you've done today, attending a workshop or presenting somewhere or doing upskilling or any, keep a running document and do write it down, because otherwise you do forget. Yes, there's no one way to what success means in life. I would argue academia is not everything. Find other things, find meaning in life. We need that balance. I know some people who've worked like mad dogs and had a heart attack in their 40s. So yeah, it's not a race. It's not a sprint. You don't need to become a professor in your whatever 40s. So because, again, I've heard some people who've done that, who then actually ended up in tears, who were professors in their 40s. And then, okay, so what then? Yeah, I find life is about pacing yourself. And that's important, because I think, don't work too hard, even if it's a PhD, even if I'm a supervisor, we need breaks, we need other things as well. We need other meanings. And yes, you're allowed to say no. And yes, it's sometimes hard. Yeah, sometimes we have to say no. On the other hand, yeah, it's that balance between opportunities, because I find opportunities quite often lead to other things, but don't always say yes. Yeah, you're entitled to say no. So I've given you that permission as well. And I think that's just about all I had to say. So any other comments or questions? No? I hope you found that helpful, and you know me now as well. So those who haven't considered yet attending ANZALS at Auckland, so please consider it. Also, if you have questions, I'm good at replying emails, believe it or not. I'm one of those academics who if I get an email, I will reply.
Heike, would you mind, if you're comfortable, would you mind putting your email address?
Yep,
on the
I'll do that. I'll do that now. That's one way I work, because I reply and then I can move on to the next thing. So, and don't take it personal if you don't hear back. Like I said, I work that way, that I do reply. But some academics will never reply, but don't take it personal. I think that sometimes that's just work a little bit different. And I approached academics as well in my field, but I've never met them personally, and they didn't reply to me. So that's a big difference between me having met someone and not. And yes, dance with your professors or anyone. Go to the dinners and the lunches and the outside or field trips. That's why I actually really like field trips. Whole day field trips. I think every conference should have a whole day field trip, because that's where you've got a chance to have human to human interaction. So yeah. So all the best. I think I'll leave you from there. And yes, don't be shy to, you know me now. If you have
Yeah,
any
thank you very
questions or
much.
anything. Yeah.
Thank you
So
very much,
thank you for the
Heike.
invitation, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the day. So,
Right. Thank you so much, Heike. That
Yeah,
is
you're very
very
welcome.
insightful. I can just second what Anita has mentioned in the chat. It's very insightful and an authentic workshop. And you have left us with many things to reflect on after this workshop. But while I was listening to you, I just want to summarize things that struck me the most. The very first one is that there isn't one way in building a research identity. People can be strategic. Sometimes your identity is just something that will emerge along the way. A second one is finding your niche, and finding what pumps you, what keeps you going in academia, and what keeps you doing what you do. That's the second one. And lastly is that academia is not everything. Everything is not about academia. And after this seminar, we go to our families, we go to our communities, and we present a different identity. And thank you for reminding us of this very important advice. And again, on behalf of ANZALS and CAUTHE, thank you for being our workshop facilitator. We appreciate it a lot, and we'll definitely keep in touch with you.
Right. Thank you so much, Richard, and everyone else. Thank you. See you.
Bye bye.
See ya.
Bye.